This is the New York Police Department's Bomb Squad. Part human, part dog, part robot, all one team.
Lethal and indiscriminate. To disarm one is to save countless lives.
NYPD Bomb Squad has given the all clear.
One reason the members of the oldest and biggest bomb squad in the United States are unique.
Bomb Squad was able to safely remove a device.
When you don't see them, the NYPD Bomb Squad is always watching for that unsuspecting threat.
NYPD Bomb Squad racing in, then hauling away another suspicious package.
Package has been properly identified.
You're listening to Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. I'm coming to you before my head explodes in a couple hours and the New York Yankees aggravate me further than they already have and do something stupid inevitably in Game 3 of the World Series because they're the New York Yankees. And they're not your father's New York Yankees, nor your grandfather's New York Yankees. Unfortunately, this is what my generation of Yankee fan has to live with. Now, they could very well win Game 3, get themselves back in the series tonight. But then again, it's the Yankees we're talking about. And if those first two games in L.A. are any indication, this is going to be a tough one, and that's putting it mildly. But this is a happy show, so we're not going to depress you with that. We'll leave them alone for the time being. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 340, a little bit of a milestone episode, of course, and it's volume 38 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. I want to welcome in everyone tonight who is tuning in via YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I already see so many of you in the live chat. Billy Ryan, who helped me start this series, of course, who was on a couple weeks ago. Christian Williams, Joe Baliga, and Dawn Gonzalez from Rochester, New York. Johnny Costello. Johnny, I'll put your decorations up soon. I am working on that. Did not forget about them. Just waiting for the right time. Been super busy with everything. And my sister's here, and hope you feel better. You're a little bit under the weather today. We spoke earlier, but hopefully you'll be back up to 100% soon, Josh. But good to see you in the chat with little Jaxie watching. And CJ's Lawn Services tuning in from Florida as well. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was a good one. Bob Boyce, former NYPD chief of detectives, who tonight's guest knows very well. He'll tell me about that throughout our conversation. What a guy, and what a great guest. Really enjoyed that one. I knew it was going to be a good one, and it sure was. So very much enjoyed finally getting him on. It took me a while, but I got him. Paul Meyenberg, I see you in the chat as well. So just going to run a couple of ads real quick. The first one is not really an ad so much as it is a flyer. And I'll toss that up here momentarily. And if you don't know by now, good folks, Mad City, Life on the Edge, and the FDNY and NYPD, of course, the very first book that I wrote. It's been out since the summertime, sold over 200 copies. I'm very proud of that, but keep flocking to it. The link in the description to purchase it via Amazon is available, as I said in the description. And it tells 20 stories from the NYPD side, 20 more from the FDNY side, which we took from this very podcast and put it into book form. The reception has been overwhelming. I've enjoyed hearing about it and hearing how much you guys have enjoyed reading it. But for those of you that don't have your hands on it quite yet, feel free to go and purchase it via Amazon. Any support is appreciated. And of course, he's in the chat, like I said, but we'll show him some love as we always do. One of the supporters and sponsors of the Mike the New Haven podcast is the co-creator and co-executive producer of Tales from the Boom Room himself, retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Proud supporter and sponsor indeed. Always grateful for Billy's support. And of course, like I said in the chat, as he always is, every week. All right, my next guest dedicated 3 decades to law enforcement. He started his career in 1990 with the old New York City Transit Police before its 1995 merger with the NYPD. Now, he was hired during the Safe Street, Safer City initiative. Crime was really, as we'll talk about, on the very high end. This was the worst year for crime in New York City when he came on the job. Over 2,000 homicides, 2,500 plus to be exact. So he was busy early on. And he patrolled the streets of the Bronx and Harlem, and of course worked in special operations on the transit side, the Vandal Squad, which if you're an old school Cops fan, was in an episode of Cops back in 1994. They did a little bit on the Vandal Squad as well. Rose through the ranks, made sergeant at the end of the 90s in 1999, and served in various leadership roles in the 4-8 in the Bronx, led detective squads out there, and it culminated, and this is why he's under the Tales from the Boom Room banner. He was the XO at the end of his career of the Arson and Explosion Squad, and that for this volume 38 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's Arson, Explosion, and Bomb Squad, is, of course, Steve Mancini. Steve, welcome. How are you?
Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Oh, no, thank you for being here. I definitely appreciate it. And we connected, of course, prior to my Chief Boyce interview. I know you know him very well, as we'll talk about tonight. So it's good to be with you this evening. So before we get into anything pertaining to your police career, kind of a two-part question. A, where did you grow up? And B, were you exposed to civil service in any form early on that dictated your path?
So, born in the Bronx, but raised in Yonkers. Parents and one older brother who you'll actually like this, retired out of Truck 3 in the Bronx. No, I mean, my paternal grandfather was a New York City sanitation guy, going back into probably the 20s or 30s, and worked into the 60s, but no police, no fire, but just a great interest and obviously respect for both professions. And, coming up through the 80s into high school, on the edge about going to college and furthering my education or possibly going into the service. Looked hard at the Navy, and then actually just graduated high school and landed a phenomenal job through a great friend. And I was there for a couple of years before I decided to take a test because my brother was already on the job. And the rest is history, I guess.
Tell your brother to come on the show for the ESU miniseries.
Yeah.
A lot of good friends of mine.
He's not even on social media.
All right. So he's off the radar. But a lot of the old school guys from the 80s and 90s that worked ESU probably remember him, and 2000s as well. Shout out to him, of course, and all the E-men and women. So 90s interesting because by this point, I know back in the day, transit had their own academy, so did housing. At some point in the 80s, it all went under the banner of the NYPD Academy. So they would put you guys in there, and then, of course, they would separate and send you off to different departments. You were either going city, which was NYPD, housing, or transit. So I don't know how much you knew about the transit police. Some knew because of taking the subway a lot. Some didn't until they were in it. But when they told you were going to transit, was the reaction, no, or was it, hey, I'm just happy to be a New York City cop?
So funny about that is because my brother got on in transit in 87.
Okay.
And, his brother-in-law got on in 85. So I kind of was like, exposed to all these stories and what's going on. But as far as, I think if I rode the subway maybe 5 times in my lifetime up to that point, that was a lot. So I kind of didn't mind. It was just kind of funny. We were all called out to the Jamaica Avenue to where the NYPD lab is. I guess a couple of days before October 15th is when I'm sworn in, 1990. And you kind of just lined up and you had your manila little index card. And you presented it. They looked up your name. And when they flipped the pages to the M's, I think there was about 18 of us in alphabetical order all going to transit off of the page. So it was pretty funny. And, you get a little snicker from applicant investigations behind the desk, and they send you down. They're like, basically, they already sent you down to the subway to meet the transit representative. I remember walking through a dark tunnel in the building and going down like two flights of stairs into the basement. And met this detective from transit applicant investigations who gave us like our welcome package. And, he was dressed like basically right out of like a Barney Miller squad, big checkered shirt and probably a tie about this big on, Mike. So that was my welcoming into the transit police department.
I got to say, you got there during really a crossroads for the city, like I mentioned, and one's positive, one's not. The negative I mentioned in the introduction, which was this was the peak of crime, the crescendo, if you will. 1990 is the Brian Wall incident, where it led to the cover in the newspaper, either the Daily News or the Post, Dave, do something. So Dave decided, that being late Mayor David Dinkins, all right, let's do the Safe Streets, Safe City initiative, which 2,800 more cops across all 3 departments, housing, transit, and the NYPD, to hit the streets. And at the same time, here's the positive correlation as well. You arrived to the transit police the same year that Bratton came in as chief. And that was his springboard for the great things he'd do later on as Boston Police Commissioner, NYPD Commissioner twice, and LAPD Chief for a time as well. You had him, you had Jack Maple early on, 27% crime drop in the 2 years they were there. What was it like, especially starting out in District 12 in the Bronx? Thanks, John Costello, for the super chat. Working under Bratton and Maple during a time when they were coming up with crime fighting techniques that really were, to that point, unheard of in 1990, but were working.
So starting out, he started all these like great little, great programs within the transit police to basically energize the job and to make guys be proud that they were in the transit police. Where my class came out, and maybe the April of '90 class right before me might have been the first group, but he started a field training officer program, and they married, one or two rookies up with an experienced officer who went to specific, field training officer program. And you worked with three individual field training officers in a period of I guess 10 or 12 weeks. And they also made you actually fly out of your command and get to see what special units were like. I had like a week in transit canine. I had a week out in transit communications in J Street. So they just got to show you like different parts of the job. And obviously he was big into the uniforms and what our uniforms look like. He kind of changed our shirts away from what the PD shirts look like. He's definitely trying to build, a spirit of, a morale in a sensitive way, in a good sensitive way, to build the job up. I remember when I first came out, we had these broken down like Suburbans. That's what we used to patrol in.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard many a times the milk crate stories or old nightsticks holding up the seats and all these things. And, within by the summer of '91, he's buying these like Chevy Caprices for us. I mean, these things were rocket ships. But don't kid yourself. I tell you what, the man was on patrol with us. He wouldn't think twice. I mean, I personally was scratched by him when I moved on to District 3 at like 207th Street in Broadway, like at 2:30 in the morning. He just popped off a train and, and I had the pleasure of actually, I did Bratton, Commissioner Bratton 3 times as a transit police chief and twice as a commissioner in New York City Police Department.
Yeah, and what an innovator! Like, and not just him. Like I said, Jack Maple too, who's not with us anymore, died way too young of cancer in summer of 2001. Again, what they came up with was through pins on a board, an early version of what's now known as CompStat, which has become a worldwide policing phenomenon. So that little pocket, I mean, for those that really don't know the history of Commissioner Bratton, he'll always point to transit as his personal springboard in New York City, because as he told me some time ago when he was on the program, he felt if he could succeed there, he could ultimately succeed with the NYPD, and he was proven right twice over. 91 to 95 is interesting for a variety of reasons. We'll cover the assignment first, then the merge later.
Sure.
Transit District 3 in Harlem and Washington Heights, interesting part of Manhattan to work, a heavy Hispanic population down there. What you're seeing, and then it's affecting the whole city for the most part at this time, is crime that's varied. A lot of guns down there, primarily though, I think at this time it's drugs in the early 90s. So we know what's going on above ground. Was that the same problem below ground, where guys are naturally trying to move product through the subway?
But you nailed it on the head. You nailed it on the head, Mike. Literally, especially, I mean, District 3 and listen, a lot of places, Bronx districts, Brooklyn districts, Eastern New York and Flatbush. And I mean, what was happening upstairs was happening downstairs. I caught the tail end of like Wolfpack robberies, and without a doubt, lawlessness on the trains and in the stations. But you mentioned the narcotics trade. Now, District 3 as a whole, Washington Heights and Harlem, I remember one station in particular, 116 and 8th Avenue. And it was, you literally had to cross the street to get from one platform to the other, to go southbound to northbound. And you would literally be walking and crushing hundreds of crack vials on the steps, because it was probably one of the biggest sets right upstairs at 116 and 8th Avenue. Same thing if you had the Broadway line, 137 to 157 on Broadway. I mean, talk about a hotbed of narcotics activity and violence. You were guaranteed you had that post, somebody was going to jail that night. But even our home station, 145 in St. Nick, because that station actually connected like the A and D lines, and you would see a lot of guys coming in from the Bronx, taking the D line over, and they were going up, and it was literally, they would either go 2 blocks down to Bradhurst Avenue or 2 blocks up, towards Broadway, and they'd be scoring, bags and bags of crack. And, back to the simplest thing of Bratton, guess what they were doing? They were beating the fare. And that simple little fare beat, you were getting pistols, you were getting bags of crack, I mean bags of crack. And so, yeah, exactly what you said. I mean, that was a real trying time in the city. And I'm glad I was able to take part in it. And also, I'll tell you one thing about, being a transit cop, especially back then, for the most part, you worked by yourself. And, and I'm a young kid. I'm, 21 years old plus at that point. And you got to learn how to talk to people really quick. I mean, you want to really survive out there. Listen, I'm not a big guy, but guess what? If you don't, if you're not able to communicate with people, that's your biggest tool. And that's what it comes down to. You got to know how to deal with people and talk to people and, figure out what you're doing and figure it out quick because you're by yourself. Because help could be far away. You could be on a train run. One of the things in field training, like say if you were on a train run on the A line, if it was an express and you left 125th Street, well, that next stop is 59th Street, which is about 7 minutes away. So if you're going to decide to start something or somebody's going to start something with you, you could be by yourself for a long, long time. So, listen, you had to know your P's and Q's and know what you're doing out there. So you get a real rude awakening. And I tell you what, I did steady midnights in District 3 there and loved every minute of it. I tell you what a great group of guys who came on the job in the mid 80s, showed us the way, showed us how to do the job, and had a good time. I really did. I mean, couldn't wait to get to work. Just one of those scenarios.
And here's the other layer of it too. I mean, your radios were not the best back then either. So depending on where you were, I mean, those signals might not go out right away.
Yep. There was, I'll tell you, my first night on solo patrol in District 3 was 168 in Broadway. And it's a split station between the A and the 1 line. And the 1 line's about 13 stories underground. So once again, I actually had probably one of the only time, luckily, thankfully, in my 30-year career, actually got in a fight in the elevator on the ride up, just trying to throw a guy out with the 1 line. And I wind up taking about like 11 or 12 stitches in my mouth from fighting this guy. And it was just the adage. You just, listen, you had to be on it, man. You had to be on it with these people. And it was, listen, it's a learning experience. And one I look back on, and I'm very grateful that I was able to partake in. So.
It's, and again, I'm laughing because in the chat, not at that story, it's a legit thing that cops faced back then. And I'm glad you came out otherwise unscathed from that fight, despite the stitches. But Joe Maliga's in the chat, and I haven't asked this question in a while. It's a running joke that him and I have where any PD or FD guest, that I get on, he wants to know, did they ever deliver a baby? Did she ever deliver a baby?
So I never delivered a baby, but I got to, within a couple of years of transit, when we got an influx of a few cars, assigned to each district, I found myself, in an RMP, probably like 3 out of my 4 nights a week. We worked 4-day work weeks, and I got to see a baby delivered up close and personal. But it was up on the street, probably like a 102 in CPW. Right on the lady couldn't even make the taxi cab that was waiting for her right on her front steps. But I give more credit to the guys in the 2-4 than I did. So.
Oh, there you go. So thank you, Joe, for submitting that question. We hadn't asked in a while. It's just the timing was off on my end, so I'm glad we could ask it tonight. A quick shout out to Cam Miller watching via Facebook and Garrett Lindgren, former guest of this program, and a veteran of the FDNY, particularly Rescue 3 and Squad 41, 41 first and 3 before he retired in 2002. So great to see you.
Garrett's my neighbor in Florida. Garrett's my neighbor in Florida.
He's mentioning that. He's like enjoying tonight's podcast starring my neighbor. So, yep. Good to see you, Garrett, and hope everything's well. I know there's a big storm recently, so hopefully, all things considered, you're doing well. So, I mean, I'll ask, right before the merger, it's interesting because I feel like, well, listen, Bratton's gone. He had left in 92, and he went back to Boston. And Maple hung around until he became first deputy commissioner when Bratton came back in 94. But the model's there. The department's moving in the right direction. There's pride restored in the agency, and there's just a general good feeling. And you guys were on an episode of Cops in late 93, early 94, which shed further light on all the good work the agency was doing. So when you see where things were starting to go in a better direction crime-wise, 93, 94, and transit had really found itself, what was the feeling as an agency? Because previously it was an agency begging to merge with the NYPD. Now, like I said, there's pride now, and you see the results. Crime fell 27%. Those declines only continued in 93, 94.
Me personally, I wasn't opposed to it. Probably in around like 92, 93, they start opening the door through laterals. So where you don't have to test again. Mm-hmm. If you did take a tri-agency exam, which I did back in, I think 88 or so I took my exam. If you took that and you got transit housing, they gave you the opportunity to roll over straight roll. So you've seen a lot of senior guys from my job, guys who got hired in the mid 80s and went to transit, went to housing. These guys went over to the PD side. Me personally, like I says, I enjoyed every bit of my time in transit, learned my trade, or felt I was learning my trade. But I personally wasn't opposed to the merger because at the time I couldn't take a sergeant's test yet in transit because they had one like in 91. I didn't have enough seniority to take the test, but that test got thrown out. And then they had a new test. And because I didn't file for the first one, it was just like a song and a dance. So, and then I actually put in for EMRU, probably in like 1994, an interview as that. But they picked a group up, and then literally, we went in 95 comes and we merge.
And that was April 2nd. Now, transit had put up a fight for that. There was a lot of injunctions. It got testy. It got very testy.
I tell you what. So I'm actually working the night of April 2nd, 1995. I'm doing a midnight, and I called it up the night before. So, Old Manhattan Central booking, which was actually in the basement of 1PP before they moved it over to 100 Center Street. So you'd lodge you're a prisoner there, and then you have to walk across a couple of blocks over to court, and especially working midnights, you probably took anywhere from 10 to 15 hours to draw up a collar. So, but I was due back for a midnight the next night, and they usually did well by you. Either try to keep you inside to hide you because you were up like for the whole day, or they would throw you outside, and we'd call it the home post, which was 145th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue. And all of a sudden, the phone rings at about 2:30 in the morning, and literally it's District 1, which is located at 59th Street. And they said, hey, because the teletype just hit, minutes prior to like Commissioner Bratton and his whole entourage are riding the trains to every district on the midnight to welcome everybody aboard to the NYPD.
I never knew that.
Yes. So now the old District 3, I left there in August of 95, but the old District 3 was probably the size of your left shoe. Okay. It was literally in the middle of the mezzanine of the St. Nicholas Avenue station. We used to access it via 146th Street down the steps. And literally it was tiny, 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 tiny. The CO's office, there was no redeeming factors about this place. And now here it was Sunday night into a Monday, and we don't have cleaners there. Cleaners are off the weekends. So the place, the garbage is overflowing. It stunk of like fried chicken and food, whatever you could eat, on a midnight tour. And, there's the desk sergeant and myself and two other ragtag cops. And here comes the commissioner himself, with this, and just took a look around, shook his head, and they got on a northbound D train for the Bronx as quick as they walked in. It was a little comical, I'd be honest with you. So
sounds like it. It sounds like it. But what's interesting to point out is that even with the merger, the patch changed, the uniforms changed, but for a lot of cops, at least initially, the assignment didn't. If you were underground, for some cops, they stayed underground for a little while. So for you, sorry, go ahead.
No, my apologies, Mike, for interrupting. Yeah, we became the, we would flip back and forth every 6 months between a division and a bureau. I probably had like 4 sets of collar brass. It was either TD or TD, depending on which chief they were putting in charge of it, whether they liked them or not. I guess it was either a bureau or a division. So for the first couple of years, they couldn't figure out what to do with us, I want to say.
Yeah, no, and 95 to 97, that's true. They were trying to figure out how to use it. They knew transit cops were a valuable tool, but it was and again, there was a commissioner change in 96, which kind of complicated matters further because Safer came in after Bratton had left. So Safer had an idea on how to use transit and whatnot. So yeah, I could see that. And I think it wasn't until 99 when that was settled, because originally it was the Transportation Bureau, I believe, after the merger.
Yep, we went into, and I tell you what, during my time in Vandals, where we fell into the Transportation Bureau, I found myself detached to highway units to address graffiti on the highways. And we were able to sign out like these unmarked highway cars. And we're like, this is great, this merge thing, man. So.
Oh, yeah, it had its benefits, and it really advanced a lot of careers. And that's what I wanted to touch on real quick, because people think of vandalism. Now, we're not talking the art forms, right? Some of it is legitimate art that they got permission to do, and we see the talent of these people. Some of it's not. Some of it's, vulgarity. Some of it, of course, is gang-related, graffiti that they're spray painting on. And some of it is just stupidity that people feel like putting on there as well. And it's, like you talked about, much like jumping the turnstile, it's these little things that lead to decay of a city or a town, and unfortunately lead to the bigger things. So as far as nipping that in the bud, and you spent a while there, 95 to 99, tell me about the mission involved with that and the importance of making sure you tackle those little things.
So, great question, because you are right. I feel like the the quality of life. I mean, that's definitely a quality of life issue, graffiti, and you're right. I mean, we would have quote unquote artists. I mean, from Europe, Amsterdam, Germany. I mean, big famous graffiti guys, in that culture. What better place is New York City, right? And so we would get a lot of intel if these guys were coming in. We would do tremendous surveillance, long-term surveillances of various places. We had a couple detectives assigned to the Vandal unit, and we would get assigned to the detectives and go out on patrol with them. They were actually pretty funny, Tom and Jerry, and that's what they're known in the graffiti world is Tom and Jerry.
Wiener?
Tom Wiener and Jerry Starrow, yeah. And I was actually working with Tom the night Tony Sanchez is killed in the 13th.
Really?
Tom and I were the second car on the scene that night.
I had no idea. Wow.
Yeah. But as far as Vandals, yeah, I mean, I worked steady midnights, 9:30 at night to 6 in the morning. Continued the midnight work for myself, and it was interesting. We covered basically Bronx and Manhattan. There was 2 different groups. There was a Brooklyn Queens base located out in Coney Island, and a Bronx Manhattan base. Our office was in the Bronx, and it was interesting work. And like I said, it was definitely like you said. I mean. Where it can be considered an art form, but even especially at that time, you started seeing like guys, etching the subway glass and destroying it that way. But also you're saying with the gang graffiti, as far as like putting hits out on people, you had to learn how to read that stuff and know like who was writing it. So I tell you what, it was a lot of intel work, a lot of surveillance work. I mean, we were proactive to a certain point, but it was fun. It was fun, but during that time, career-wise, and what drew me to the job was wanting to be a detective, wanting to do investigations. And I kind of went over to the office. We had a promise where we were going to go into the investigative track so I could chase my shield. And unfortunately, that changed, and I wound up opening up the patrol guide. And I studied for sergeant, while I was assigned into Vandals. So,
and you would get that later on in early 1999. Now, of course, by this point, you've got a sizable amount of time on the job. It's about 9 years, so close to a decade. And I feel like that's a good spot. I mean, listen, if somebody makes sergeant younger or any kind of rank younger, you don't begrudge them necessarily as long as they're willing to learn and embrace the role and learn from those that have more seniority and time. And they can grow into a great leader, great detective, great sergeant, and so on and so forth. But in this case, 9 years, you had, like I said, a lot of time on patrol. You'd been in busy spots. Did you feel confident? I mean, again, it's still a big transition, but did you feel slightly more at ease taking that test and being promoted, considering you almost had a decade on the job?
I was ready for it. It's what I wanted. I decided that, that was the career path I wanted to follow. And obviously, when my number was called and, I make boss and, but now it's my turn to go to a precinct. And although I have about 9 years on the job because I'm promoted, I'm an October hire. So it's more 8.5 I have when I'm promoted. But now I'm going to a precinct for the first time in my career with 8.5 years on the job. And you're right. I worked in busy spots during busy times and, did, almost 4 years in Plainclothes. And listen, our work wasn't limited to graffiti. My last collar in the Vandal squad was a gun collar in the 4-8 precinct, no less. So we were out there. Listen, we were out there putting our hands on people. We had the luxury. We weren't really on the trains on the midnights. We had unmarked vans, unmarked cars. So, listen, we were doing a little, I want to say, borough crime work or whatever the case is, all dependent on what was on the agenda for the night. But so here it is, 8.5 years. I'm promoted to sergeant and I'm going to the precinct for the first time, which is going to be a complete change of what I know.
Before we continue, because we mentioned Tom Wiener, so I don't want to gloss over him. He was one of the first guys, for those of you that don't know, to die of 9/11 cancer that's documented. I mean, the event happened in 2001. He died May of 2003. So it was not long after that he got sick and passed away. And like you said, a legendary guy in transit. So when you look back on him, another good guy that left us way too soon, what are your memories of working with Tom? I didn't want to gloss over.
Listen, I actually ran into Tommy first in my career. He was a detective in District 3. And he was a storied Vandal cop back in the day, like through the 80s, got his shield. A lot of the guys in transit used to go what was called Citywide Task Force, which was, a real numbers unit, big numbers unit for fare evasion, and moved on to either like central robbery and wind up getting their shields. And I don't know Tommy's actual track, but when I go over to Vandals again, the initiative is on where they included guys, to increase the number in the unit, and that's when they assigned Tommy and Jerry DeSaro, and they were both Vandals cops, and they just lived and breathed, and like I says, these guys worked with homicide squads and catching squads, because they can interpret the stuff, they can interpret the graffiti, they knew the intel, they knew who the players were. And they were big help. Listen, it wasn't graffiti. Like I said, these guys were solving like big cases for, catching squads throughout the city.
Thank you for sharing some anecdotes about him. Again, way too young, 43 years old when he died. But a great legacy he left behind, that's for sure. So he's not forgotten. When you mentioned him, like, I got to ask about him. I didn't want to keep moving without mentioning him. So thank you for going into that. Now, I've heard a lot about BMOC, and I know Ray Kelly, this precedes him. But Ray Kelly talked about later on, we should make a sergeant school so that they can learn how to be sergeants first before we put them out on the street in any given command. But that kind of existed with BMOC. But for those not familiar with it, tell me about what it was, what it entailed, and how you feel it helped you, if at all, for what would come as a patrol supervisor.
I think it did. So BMOC is, when I got promoted in 99, it was about 3.5 weeks. And I attended in 300 Gold Street, which was the old Transit Police Academy. Because after I graduated from 20th Street in 91, I had to go to learn how to be a transit cop for 3 weeks at the Transit Police Academy. So went out there, and you're right. Listen, it's situational. It's administrative work that you're going to be responsible for, scenario based work that you're going to be faced with supervising your officers. Back to the patrol guide, what you're responsible for as a patrol supervisor. And then they have, IEB come in and speak to you, which you're, and various chiefs on the job will come in. It prepared me. I want to say, listen, it opened my eyes up, because especially where I was now going to, become a precinct level boss. And I've never actually, I never actually worked out of a precinct. So it was fine. Listen, there's room for growth, I feel, Mike, in everything the department does. And I know it was around for, a while at that point. I mean, 99. I know people getting promoted back in the early 90s. BMOC existed. So I don't know how long it is today. I mean, it's a while ago, but yeah. I mean, scenario based. I remember them showing like videos of some integrity issues that I tell you what, I got kind of threw me for a loop a little bit. But listen, I guess anything's possible. Put it that way. And yeah, it was interesting. It was good stuff. But I was chomping at the bit. I was ready to go. I wanted to get there. And wanted to get out there and see what it was all about.
And you did. And for almost the next decade, the Bronx primarily was your home. You had different assignments within that decade, of course, but the Bronx is where your base was from 99 until at least about 07, 08, as we'll discuss. So the first stop from March 99 until August of 2000 was, again, patrol supervisor in the 4-8. So not a soft landing spot at all. You're in a busy spot there.
They actually gave us in BMOC to give you your dream sheet. And I knew I wanted to go to the Bronx because I was, I had a young family, married, had a young family at the time. And actually, I'll take that back. Only my oldest. My youngest is 24. So I only have my oldest is 26. So no, just for the commuting, whatever the case is. But even my time in Vandals, I was driving only back down to downstairs in 180th Street. So my ties, go back to like 95 now in the Bronx. And just I think everything it's very important. When you got to commute distances, and later in my career, I found that out. It's draining, you know what I mean? And it's exhausting and just adds to the stress at times. But so my dream sheet consisted of the 4-8, 4-6, or the 4-4. So regardless of where I landed, I was going to go to work for a living. And luckily, I got the 4-8. And I tell you what, phenomenal bunch of cops. Great bunch of cops. I think. I watched your program with Angel Masonette.
Yeah.
Angel was a midnight cop when I first got there, and then we worked closer when I was the crime sergeant. He was in the Tracer unit, and a great bunch of active cops. And the 4-8 as a whole, for people who aren't familiar with it, it goes up basically north to the Bronx Zoo, along Fordham Road and Fordham University, and goes all the way south down to like the Cross Bronx and Park Avenue, which technically like the supervisor's parking lot of the 4-8's in the 4-2 precinct. So, and what I enjoyed about the 4-8, I felt it was kind of like right down the middle. So at any given point, we could be that A house, or there's plenty of days where, listen, it was just it was okay, and which was good for me as a new supervisor there, because it just gave you the opportunity to learn. But for the most part, I paid attention to my people, and I learned a whole new job. You know what I mean? I was very fortunate. I got stuck on day tours. I didn't want day tours, but that's just the luck of the draw. I wanted to go to 4 to 12s and run around. Didn't get it. And for the most part, the day tours was a little reserved, more reserved. You see more family people working day tours, whatever the case is. But I got to identify a bunch of young cops who just came out of field training, and I was lucky enough to get them into my patrol squad. And these guys, they wanted to work. Something. They were great. Great workers, hard workers. And after I think I was on patrol for about a year and a half as a patrol supervisor. And I was given an opportunity now to move into the precinct special ops. And I basically adopted these young guys out of patrol. And, we moved forward in the 4-8. But great spot, great cops, really and truthfully. And plenty of good places to eat, too, in the 4-8. You don't get hungry in the 4-8.
You certainly don't. There's lots of places in the Bronx that are that way, which is good. Yeah. I mean, you can never go wrong. And the beauty of it is any time of day, too. There's whatever your palate wants. It doesn't matter the time of day. You can always satisfy it working in a command like that out in the Bronx. So, by special operations, of course, you're referring to anti-crime, where, like I said before, anti-crime on its face was like the epitome, and street crime too, was the epitome of what you want plainclothes policing to be. Whereas there is determination, there is a element of gung-ho-ness, but it's not uncontrolled because, patience is a part of it too, as I was talking about with Chief Boyce, where you're not listening to the radio. The only way you're going to go on a radio call is if it's a 1013. Otherwise you're going to stay back and you're going to wait and you're going to wait and you're going to wait some more until you see something, even if it's a little bulge in someone's pocket, which could be a gun, could be a knife, could be drugs. And then you're going to, pounce and make that collar. So working that, especially given your background in transit, that had to feel like home for you.
Well, it was great. It was so, I had a couple of different COs in the 4-8 in my tenure there. But in the past, like when I was a patrol boss, the crime teams used to flip-flop. 10 to 6 during the day, and then a 6 to 2. And you do a week of 10 to 6s, then a week to 6 to 2s. And I forget who the boss was who said, that's kind of silly. I'm going to make two distinct teams. So I took over the day team because I came off the day tours. So I did the 10 in the morning, 6 at nights. And the cops, for the most part, I attracted, like I said, a couple of my young guys that I adopted off patrol, and a couple of seasoned guys who were 4 to 12 cops and went through like the SNU unit. And we put a great working team together. And like you said, that is sit and wait work. You don't chase the radio. But that also started, kind of the investigative track for me. And also for, I want to say, the guys who were on my team. I really feel hone their skills, come in, my MO, come in every day and look at the 49 board. If there was a shooting, if there was non-fatal shoot the night before, if there was a stabbing, meet with the CO. Meet with I'd go right upstairs, meet with the squad commander upstairs. Hey, you guys looking for anybody? Can we help you out? And I actually established a great rapport. I mean, my guys would go out and we caught plenty of guys for the squad. But yeah, okay, listen, there's that non-fatal shoot the night before. Well, the bosses expects us to go out there as his crime team, and we're gonna put a little activity out in that area. We're gonna be known that we're out there, And whether it's a narco collar, whether you just putting your hands on people and letting them know that no good. We're not going to have this here. And it was great work, interesting, fun work. It was fun. It was, I know you've interviewed plenty of guys who came on the job before me, but it's pretty much the best way of describing playing cops and robbers in anti-crime, without a doubt.
Yeah, no, and it was, and it kind of, like I said in the interview with Chief Boyce, by the way, Christian Flood sends his regards. He's watching tonight.
Chris is good people.
Yeah, very good guy. I had him on the show a little while ago for our HNT miniseries. Good to see you, my friend. You got to come back on for a part 2. We will talk about that. I promise. I didn't forget you, Christian. But good to see you as always. It exists now in a little bit of a different form. Anti-crime, it's now CRT, and they're a little bit more identifiable because they're wearing marked clothing. And nothing against those guys. They're doing the best that they can. But that was what you guys were doing. That was real plainclothes.
Yeah, it was. Listen, I can't knock any, and our kids that are on the job today, I give them so much credit. I really do, because it's different. It's a different world. It's a different police department. But yeah, anti-crime in the very early 2000s, and going back to the mid 90s, like I'm in Plainclothes in the Vandal squad, doing that sort of work as well. interesting time, but listen, it's what the department wants right now. That's the standard. And you work what like our stories that I'm sharing with you and guys who come on before me. That's what they are now. And it's stories. They're stories that I'm glad I could share. Don't get me wrong. But that's just the work they have to do now, the CRT team. And I tell you what, I have my brother's nephew is in, I guess he's based out of the 5-2. And he's like the precinct level, anti-crime, whatever you want to call him, captain's team, whatever the secret word is. And I see plenty of things. This kid's pulling pistols off the street left and right up in the 5-2 right now. I give them a lot of credit. A lot of credit to kids who are on patrol right now. So.
Oh, and a shout out to them, of course, because no matter what it's called, anti-crime, CRT, street crime, whatever the case is, you still have your eyes. You still got to pay attention to what's out there. And as long as you have those working, you can pick up on those things, you're able to make good collars. I mean, look at what John Diller was doing when he was killed in line of duty back in March. He was taking guns off the street, and when he was killed by that savage out in Queens, that's exactly what he was doing. He was taking guns off the street. So no matter what era we're in, that's still an important thing. And no matter what the unit's called, we're certainly glad they're still out there doing just that. Now, August of 2003 is an interesting point in your career because it's a little bit of a transition. You're still in the 4-8. You're not in the plainclothes side anymore, so that's a little bit bittersweet. But you are the detective squad, which is kind of what you wanted, So now it's a little bit different from street-level crimes to longer-term investigations. You had done that to an extent during your time at Special Operations Vandals in the mid to late 90s. You're getting another crack at it here in mid-2003.
Well, funny way how I got there, because I always wanted it. Like I said, I had a great rapport with the squad commander who had the 4-8, Patty Campbell, and he went on to the Joint Terrorist Task Force. And but I never wanted to go. The one thing in the NYPD, you're a boss, and if you want to pursue an investigative career, you have to go down for a career path interview. And basically, IAB has the first crack at you. Okay, so if you apply for the Detective Bureau, narcotics, intelligence, anything along those lines, you go down to a panel. I believe 3 captains interview you, and you have to sign the waiver that Internal Affairs, if they want you, they get you, and it's at least a 2-year bit there. And listen, nothing against them. It's a necessary evil. I didn't want any part of it. So I wasn't interviewing. And one morning we come in the 4-8 and I'm looking at the board and I go down to the office. We had our own office and the boss calls me, the captain calls me, he goes, "Where are you guys?" I'm like, "We're in the building. What's up?" He goes, "Get out to there's a triple homicide, drug-related triple homicide, people like hogtied, shot in the head, whatever the case is." And so we go out there. And at the time, the Bronx chief of detectives in the Bronx 1-star was Joe Resnick, who was a phenomenal investigator. Tremendous. Listen, God forbid something happened to me or a family member, this is the guy you would want coming in. But a tough man, an incredibly tough man. So, I sent my guys out, and a couple of guys, they go work the crowd. And we had a CI local, and I had this one cop, Ray Morales. He was phenomenal. He actually went on. He was retired as the special ops lieutenant in the 4-0. Solid kid, great kid. And comes to me. He gets his little inside information. And Resnick calls like a huddle in the street. And when all my bosses over here. Well, last I checked, I looked at my shield. I was a boss, I thought, But, I think I was in a football jersey that day and, and jeans or whatever the case. Obviously dressed as an anti-crime boss. And we start talking. He starts talking to run down the case, and he eyeballs me, and he just stops, and he goes up, and he goes down me, and then here comes the tirade, Mike. He just starts leaning into me, something awful, and then he finishes it. Well, what in the world are you going to add to this conversation that I'm having with my supervisors? So I take out my pad and I give him, 6 different things, and he looks at one of the lieutenants there, and he goes, "Do you have any of this?" And the answer was no. So listen, I took the piece of paper out. I handed it to the lieutenant from the 4-4 squad, and I walked away. Listen, I did my job. My guys did their job. It was all great. And later that evening, the 4-8 set up pretty odd. Where in the back of the 4-8 is because upstairs is the patrol bureau. So you have chiefs coming and going, the big bosses all the time. And I'm leaving. I'm going in the tour. And he's walking out. So I hold the door for the guy. And he walks past me and he stops. He apologizes to me. which I thought was huge. And listen, here's this guy's got a terrible as a tyrant. And I'm like, boss, all good. No worries. Listen. And he goes, I said, listen, I'd love to come work for you someday. And he goes, I know who you are. Don't worry about it. 2 weeks later, I'm home mowing my lawn and the precinct CO called me. He goes, hey, do you want to go upstairs? I'm like, we've been through this many times. I'm not going for the interview. He goes, no, you've been selected with like 3 other anti-crime sergeants in the Bronx to go upstairs, no board interview. So that's how I made my way from patrol into the detective squad as a sergeant. And that was, I believe, about August of 03. I go upstairs to the 4-8 squad. So, I always reflect on that story because, you do your job, you do your job the right way. And a lot of times it goes unnoticed. And that's okay too. And this time it was noticed. And thanks to my guys, you know what I mean? I was never the guy who took full credit. You know what I mean? You're only as good as your people. And
Right.
I had good people.
Mm-hmm.
So I start my career, which is now 03, and I do 17 years in the detective bureau going forward.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because, like Chief Boyce and I talked about, and it's not the first time it has been mentioned on the show, pardon me, in that in the line of work that you did, or like our friend in the chat, Garrett Lindgren, did, recognize your people when they do a good job when you can, because it's the kind of work where they may go out the door on a case or on a call, and they may not come back. So, and that's not hyperbole, that's not dramatic. Go down to FDNY headquarters in Metrotech in Brooklyn. Go down to One Police Plaza. There's a lot of names on that wall of people that did just that. Reported to work for a tour one day, went out to do the job, and did not come back. So when you have a chance to tell them an attaboy and tell them how much you appreciate them, do it, because you never want that regret of saying, they did such a great job, I never got the chance to tell them, and now they're gone. So I'm glad he did that.
Listen, and on top of that, even the department recognition, my cops were expected to write like their own stuff up for an EPD or an MPD. I mean, that's ridiculous. I was the patrol boss. I'm your frontline supervisor. I should be recognizing you, with department recognition for a great job. Obviously beyond your annual evaluation where, and I put a lot of time and thought, I never just, was the copy and paste guy for the evaluation. I always put weight into preparing my evaluations for my people because I hoped, if they were going for an interview or whatever the case is, and they would pull those evaluations, that people would take the time to read them. And always treat them the right way. Listen, don't take, kindness for weakness, but, listen, family first, and you take care of your people, so it's a hard job and you need that type of support. I'm a big believer in it.
That's the way it's supposed to be. Very, very much well said. Now, this is kind of cumulative in terms of you had a cup of coffee in the 4-3, which is where truck 3 is, of course, as you know, from June to October of 06. You had the 4-5 for a little while. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
No, there's always a story there, but go ahead, man. I don't want to hold you up.
No, don't hold me. Don't listen. It's your story. You tell how you see fit.
So listen, the 4-8 squad, about 2 years there. I find myself, I'm supervising about 30 detectives, guys who came on the job, in the 70s and 80s, and just phenomenal investigators. And here I am at a point in my career again. I'm starting page 1, fresh. I don't know what detectives do. And the one I will mention and give props to is, I'm supervising the detective who actually arrested Julio Gonzalez for the Happy Lands fire back in 1980, back March of 90 or something, March of 90. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually have that case file. I'm reading the Happy Lands, case of 87 people are killed in a fire, and I'm technically supervising this detective who came on the job in 1968. I wasn't even alive yet. 68. Wow. And he got to the 4-8 squad in like 81, Mike. He was always a 4-8 guy.
My goodness. He's still with us?
No, he passed away.
Oh.
He retires. I tell you what, 68. I mean, he probably retires in like 13, 14. I mean, he goes right to the very end, ages out. And I don't think Kevin did a couple of years after that, unfortunately, and passed.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of guys like that. They put so much into the job, and then after they leave it, after so many years of working hard, they're like, now what? And they don't know what to do with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's sad.
You don't have an option. So after a couple of years in the 4-8, I go down to the Bronx Homicide Squad, and I run an apprehension team. And we were literally, our mission was to catch killers and people who shot, non-fatal shooters. The local squads would hold on to the investigation for 2 or 3 weeks. And if they couldn't find the guy, they would turn it over to us. And I inherit I inherit 4 or 5 guys who, I tell you what, they could find Bigfoot and have him turn on the abominable snowman. These guys were phenomenal, phenomenal detectives. You do not want them looking for you because they are going to find you.
Mhm.
And a different time. Listen, it's 2005, 6. And, the perps didn't know about how we could track cell phones at the time. It wasn't, out in the media yet. So listen, that I had one guy, Jimmy McSloy, who was phenomenal at that. Other guys, you just think, like I said, they could find Bigfoot, and here he goes. And you just like, how do we do that? And we caught cases from, Puerto Rico. We chased perps from Puerto Rico up to Massachusetts in that 10 or so months. I had the unit, and it was actually funny. So Easter of 2006, we're off. We had Sundays and Mondays off, and phone rings, and there's a 2-year-old shot and killed in the 4-6. Family's driving to church with the baby in the car. They drive into a gunfight. I forget the name of the street, escapes me. And unfortunately, the baby's shot and killed in the car. So it's all hands on deck. They bring my team in. 4-6 and Bronx Homicide do great work. They're starting to put names together. And me and my team were out in the 7-5 like all night, like banging doors, like looking for these guys. And basically, we worked the whole week. I'm not kidding you. We worked the whole week, chase them down to in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. And we wind up, getting a couple of guys. And unfortunately, the overtime bill was kind of high. And, let's just say certain chief of detectives, although I was giving him like updates every 8 hours, I guess he didn't want to reward good work. And I was the boss I had one guy who was on the verge of retiring, and he left in July. And, I took a hit. I took the hit. They sent me to the 4-3. That was my punishment. I was at a homicide squad, and they actually disbanded the team also. But something, we went out on a high note. I mean, it doesn't get any more real than that. And we were able to bring justice. Well, I like to say we tried to bring justice to that family, but nothing's going to bring that baby back. And I went to the 4-3. I guess they thought they were punishing me. It was a little bit of a better commute. And what a great place. Phenomenal detectives. Unbelievable detectives. And I'll tell you what, unless you work in the 4-3, you don't realize how busy the place is. The Bronx is synonymous for the 4-4, the 4-6, the 4-7, like all these great places too. And not to take anything away from any cop, any place in the city, but I didn't know the work that's generated in the 4-3. So like I said, I summered in the 4-3 for 06. But it was nice having a brother next door in truck 3. So on my 4-1s, I got to have dinner with the boys every so often, and it was a good place. To tell you what, talented, great detectives there. And then in October, I guess my penance was over, and I got the call to be a commanding officer of the 4-5 Detective Squad.
You should have told them you really hated it in the 4th. They would have kept you there. This commute is awful.
Oh,
wink, wink.
Terrible.
These detectives, they stink. Wink, wink.
Yeah.
But listen, the needle kept on moving, and it moved, and it continued to move in a positive trajectory, which is all that matters in a career that was as long as yours. And of course, like you said, you had the 4-5. And there's a nice little anecdote here as well. May 2007, a promotion at the time to supervisor detective squad. You had been a sergeant for a pretty long time at this point, but now you got the SDS attached to it as well. So that had to feel pretty good.
It did. Listen, it was definitely what I was chasing and what I was in the game for. Looking back, and you recap my career, obviously 30 years. Any advice I give to anybody, I didn't want to say I found myself in a rut, but I never took a lieutenant's test either. Never even tried, never even filed for one.
No,
I was just always happy doing with the spots where I was in at the time a test came up. And I looked at it like, hey, I make lieutenant's money. And definitely that's what I was interested in doing. It was actually like a Bob Boyce story later in my career. But we'll touch on that. But I got the SDS money, and something I was very happy to, because at the time, when I got promoted to sergeant, both of my boys, one was 10 months old and one wasn't even born. So they both got to come down and see me get promoted, which was pretty cool.
And that's what it's all about. Now, I wanted to stay on the subject of homicide investigations for a moment, because in a situation like you mentioned earlier of catching non-fatals in terms of shootings, you can at least talk to the person. Now, if they want to disseminate the information, is up to them, but at least you have someone you can talk to at the surface level, at least. And where it goes from there, and like I said, is up to the subject. Homicide victims, you don't. You're their advocate. You're their voice, because their voice has unfortunately been silenced. So, it's a heavy responsibility to take on, but as a lot of detectives that I've had the pleasure of interviewing on this program have told me, it's an honor and a weight that they were proud to take on, and they were so invested in solving these cases. It didn't matter if it was a quote unquote public service homicide or that 2-year-old, they were on it. So as far as the science of a homicide investigation from your perspective, no matter the victim and their walk of life or way of life, tell me about, the process for you, the do's and the don'ts, and some of the more rewarding outcomes in cases.
You hit it on the head as far as what the detectives put forth. When the bell rang, literally, you could be in the squad room and it's 10 o'clock at night and you're doing nothing the whole night. And obviously, they should be, typing their cases, and same thing with me doing my admin work. And, you get the radio, you hear the radio going on, and you figure what's in, okay, let's, get the squad out here. And you get in the call, okay, listen, guys going out of the picture, or, rush the bus, all the terminology. And boy, they would turn it on. The ties would go up, the jackets would go on. And I guess from a detective standpoint, that is why they were detectives and investigators. I was lucky, man. I got to almost step back and just watch the show as the boss, and kind of listen. My job, I like to kind of run interference for them and let them work. You know what I mean? You get the captain show up, this guy show up, whatever the case is, and I would have my answers. Listen, I would have the information. I would be involved in the case. I would get all the details of the case. And when I can, especially after doing it for a while, I would include myself in the case. But, one adage I learned early in my career, bosses don't go in the box. You know what I mean? That's a detective's job. You know what I mean? Let the detectives do their work. But from that standpoint, like the bodies drop, I mean, the effort and the time, guys would be there a week, 2 weeks, not even blink of the eye. They wouldn't be, I was always lucky enough, my time in the Bronx, if a body dropped, I don't care if we went, through the night to 4 or 5 in the morning before we went back to the squad room. And I always ran home right up the hutch so I could get a wink of sleep in my own bed and a shower and a fresh suit. It was an absolute luxury, and right back at it. Detectives, I knew detectives, from when I was back in the 4-8. They lived, up in Orange County, whatever the case is. And they would come down with 4 days worth of clothes for the just in case, and willing to do it and willing to put that time in, because like you said, you are that advocate for that person, and regardless of what it was, and just phenomenal work, Mike, really and truthfully, interesting work. And just when you say, oh, I think I've seen it all, something always tops it. Something always tops it. So it was a real interesting time in my career, when I gladly reflect back on. And, outside of the 2-year-old, I remember my first homicide as a squad commander in the 4-5. It was actually an 18-year-old Columbia University student walking home, talking to his girlfriend, and he had one of the newest Motorola Razor phones, or whatever the case is. And there was 4 guys in a car who they were scoping him out along Tremont Avenue the whole time. And they go rolling for his phone, and he's actually on the phone with his girlfriend, and he's shot in the back, right in his lung. And for a phone, which, listen, is, you've heard it 10 times over, but his mother had to find him, because his girlfriend calls the mother, and the mother runs the 4 houses out, and finds her son dead in the street, over a cell phone. And that one sticks with me, because with my squad and the guys from the homicide squad, we actually phone records and triangulation, and actually 4-5 patrol, I'd be amiss if I don't give them credit, because they actually stopped 2 guys fleeing the scene who gave bogus information, but at least they 250'd them. And the guys in homicide were able to put all that together. And we wind up hitting a couple of doors in Story Avenue projects, just down the road from the 4-3. And, we gathered everybody up, and we know we got the right guys. And we went at them hard. We went at them. They were guests of the 4-5 for about 30 hours. And unfortunately, they walked out the next day, because Bronx District Attorney wouldn't give us authority or permission to collar them for the homicide. They all pointed fingers at each other, and lot of moving parts to it, and it's unfortunate. And I tell you what, within a year, I think 2 were dead, and 2 of them were caught in like a citywide robbery pattern. So these were bad guys, and we knew we had the right guys. And like you said, but the advocate for that victim, that was our job. And not that we failed, we just weren't supported. And that's 2006. That's November of 2006, and here it is. I mean, a long time ago, and it still weighs on my head that we couldn't just shut the door on that and close that up the right way.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, at least it caught the scales of justice caught up with them to a degree. Because that life, if you're living that street life, it's going to catch up with you.
Oh,
you're not going to come out of that unscathed. Very few people do. 2 of them aren't even here anymore. Womp womp. Too bad. And the other ones, at least they got nabbed, even though they didn't get nabbed on the murder charge. They did end up behind bars in some capacity, hopefully long term. So at least they're not completely scot-free, which would have been even worse. We're glad that didn't happen.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that I tell you, unless you see it firsthand, how the detectives go about their business and catching these cases and doing that work, it's just amazing. It's amazing work. So.
Oh, absolutely. As Christian Flood says, and it's the motto of the DEA, meaning not the Drug Enforcement Agency, for those of you in the chat that don't know, the Detectives Endowment Association, which is the detective union for the NYPD. Greatest detectives in the world, and they're not lying. That's not hyperbole either. We've seen it time and time again. And no knock to the other agencies that do great work across the country, LAPD, Chicago, any big city you can think of. The NYPD has proven they are the gold standard for detectives. That gets proven year after year, day after day, no matter the era. So Boyce, I know in 2010 is when Chief Boyce went to the Bronx. And I feel like this is probably the time your careers intersect, because then he had Manhattan for a little bit, and then he was chief of detectives. Was it November of 2010 you started?
So August of 2010,
mm-hmm.
We were kind of, we were in a rudderless ship for the most part in Bronx detectives with leadership. And at the time, Phil Pulaski is the chief of detectives.
Mm-hmm.
And he was trying to change the world in the detective bureau. And I kind of pushed back. I was at a point in my career, I somehow earned a nickname, Captain Cavalier. I'm not really sure how I earned that. But he was trying to make everything robotic, where, everything was the same move. He came out with these checklists and, everything in a case folder. And, no 2 investigations are the same. And I'll come out and say, listen, not everything he wanted to do for investigations was terrible, but the way he went about his business, I mean, he was crushing people left and right, crushing his executives, crushing. He decided he had to make an example of squad commander in every borough. And so there was a CompStat in the spring or early summer of 10. And I'm actually on vacation. And the 4-5 was up. And the 4-5 wasn't a huge comstatable command, but they were actually shooting for the precinct commander. They didn't really like him. Nice man, but he was in way over his head. And so I don't go to the podium. I'm literally away on a golfing trip. And but my Bram sergeant, who's now actually she's a deputy chief, still an active deputy chief on the job. She tried her best, but like I said, they were pushing hard for the precinct commander, and we were just kind of like cannon fodder at that time. And Chief Pulaski thought my squad wasn't, working, whatever the case is, so he sent all of his, investigative units and all these people into my squad consistently. And so I found myself in an hour and 45-minute like GO15, which is basically the job's way of interrogating you. And I wasn't following like all of his little minute details to the T. And hence now Chief Boyce comes into the Bronx August of 2010, and it's my 40th birthday, and I'm now on vacation with my family. We're away for 2 weeks, so I'm checking in. I mean, we're down in Florida or whatever we're doing, and I speak to my Bram Sergeant Julie Morell, and she goes, "Hey, this new boss brought us in, all the supervisors. He had his first meeting." And he walked into the room and she goes, "Steve, I tell you, this guy, he could be the police commissioner, the way he carries himself. He is legit." And I'm like, "Julie, stop. He ties his shoes just like you and I, whatever the case is. I'm sure." Because I remember Boyce when he had the 40 precinct and he was a duty captain and I was a patrol sergeant. So I was like, okay, whatever the case is. So I come back to work after 2 weeks, 2 weeks vacation. And in the Bronx, you, especially on the weekends, because the bosses whack up the weekends, days off. So I was covering west side of the Bronx. And probably within like 20 minutes of my tour, about 5 o'clock, there's a double homicide in St. James Park up in the 5-2. So I had the coverage. You fly over there, and it was gang related, Trinitarios, whatever the case is. And our chief Boyce just came out of the gang division, CY gang division at that point. So I listen. I knew the guys because I was already in Bronx Detectives for 7 years at the time. So I'm getting all the facts for myself because I'm going to be tasked with doing the reports for downtown and notifying the chief of detectives. And they're like, hey, the new chief wants to hear from you. He wants an update. Okay, I call him. So I give him, A, B, C, and D on the double homicide, and he hits me with E and F on the gang side. And the one thing I tell you what, learned from Chief Resnick, if you don't have the information, just say, hey, I'm going to get back to you. And it's an acceptable answer, which it was. And so I called the chief Boyce back, and I give him what he wanted, and, I'll give him a further update in the night. And he goes, who is this again? I says, Steve Mancini. I have the 4-5 squad, but I'm just covering the 5-2 for the night. He's like, I have to talk to you. He goes, I said, I fully expected it. So, like I said, I was on the bad boy list from downtown. And I went to meet the man the next day. And we wind up sitting down. I sat in his office for about 2.5 hours. And we talked man to man. And we talked about the Detective Bureau, where we were. Nobody told him, listen, not that I had a great amount of time, but I had 7 years vested in Bronx Detectives at the time. I was a squad commander for almost 4 years. I had the money. I feel I did my time. And like I said, did I feel everything Chief Pulaski did was great? No, I didn't. I'll say it to you out loud right now. And like I said, it had a lot to do with, we weren't robots. And that's how I felt he kind of was treating us. So apparently Chief Boyce really liked what I had to say to him. And he told me, go back and run your squad. He goes, paper has a history of getting lost sometimes in the police department. Because I knew I was supposed to lose my command and all these things Pulaski wanted to do to me. I remember getting a phone call, RDO Friday, Saturday. It's probably about a month later. And he goes, listen, paper was too far along. He goes, I got to move you, but I'm moving you to my team. We're going to start a team. He goes, because I'm an outsider again in the Bronx. I'm new back into the game with the Bureau. But listen, he had phenomenal experience as a sergeant and lieutenant, running Brooklyn squads, back in the day. And I joined his team. I had my 20th anniversary. I just, completed my 20 years. And I never worked inside before. And I wound up going inside and working for what would be now the future chief of detectives. And I work with him in the Bronx from 10 to about 13. And I'm basically his borough administrator. I'm pushing a lot of paper, dealing with all the squads, but I'm just getting to pick this man's brain daily and work for him. And, I literally, look back on it going, man, I wish I met this guy 10 years ago because I know I'd probably be an executive myself. I mean, he's just got that drive and he puts that drive upon you and, just a really great guy. And so I remember one afternoon, it's, the spring of 13. And he walks in my office, and we're up on the 4th floor of Bronx Detectives is located in 1086 Simpson Street, which is the old Fort Apache, Mike, from back in the day. Mm-hmm. And it is just a beautiful, if you ever get a chance to visit there, or if you want to go visit there, let me know, and we'll take a ride down.
I do. You don't have to ask me twice.
Phenomenal, beautiful police facility. So he walks into my office, and he's kind of like, hey, do you want to go to Manhattan? And I'm looking at it. I look at my watch and I'm like, here's the Captain Cavalier in me. I'm like, no, boss, I'm going to be going home soon. I'll get one of the detectives to drive you down there. And he's like, no, you moron. I just was given Manhattan Detectives. He goes, the big guy is flipping the chief of Manhattan Detectives and me. And here I am, like now 23 years, basically a Bronx boy, the whole mainland theory in my head, Mike. Manhattan. Oh, scary, scary.
The city.
Yeah. And so the next day he's actually the duty chief. Once a month he was the duty chief, and they do that with the bosses where they got to take a uniform tour either on the midnights or the 4 to 12s, and they're basically the chief of the city. And he goes, well, I got the duty tomorrow, so you're driving me anyway. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So he came in about 3 and he goes, we got to take a ride down there. So we go down there, And now Detective Bureau Manhattan's located in the 13th precinct, right next to Truck 1 on 21st Street.
Yep.
And we go down there, and I talk about I feel like an egg out of water, where, whatever, the fish out of water. I'm just standing in the hallway like a stranger. And, I'm in uniform, and I'm a uniform sergeant, whatever the case is, assigned to the Detective Bureau, driving the uniform chief. And he goes in, has a little meeting. I meet the XO, who I wind up working for. He was actually the CO of SID in my arson explosion days. And listen, nice people, whatever the case is. So we get back in the car, and he's just like, "You're going to love it down here with me." So I think he made my decision, and that's how I wound up going to Manhattan Detectives with him for the most part. So for me, it was an interesting 10 months that we were down there. More good work, but different work, because you don't got the violence that I was used to in the Bronx. And obviously anything south of 59th Street is a huge deal, and you get to learn that really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, for instance, like the Manhattan South Homicide Squad. My office was like right down the hall from them. And I'd see them, "Hey, what are you guys up to?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, we're going out on a grand larceny." I'm like, "Excuse me?" I'm like, "You guys are the homicide squad." And they're like, "Yeah, boss, this is just what we do down here." Like I said, different work, but same thing. Great people, good detectives, just, and not to say they're any less than the guys in the Bronx or Brooklyn. It's just different work. But I tell you what, South Homicide had some great detectives, and I get it. I understood, that what the Bronx wouldn't look twice at was a big deal in Manhattan, and it got the attention it deserved. And at the time when Boyce had Manhattan, he had the whole island. Now it's two different. The detective boroughs were split in two under Commissioner Bratton. Mm-hmm. So he had all, I think, 20, 21, 22 precincts. So we literally went from, the 3-4 precinct down to the first precinct, he was responsible for. So it was an interesting time, but not my cup of tea. I was taking a railroad into work, railroad, subway. I'm walking. I'm like, what is this? What's going on here?
I miss the Bronx.
I miss the Bronx. You're right. You're absolutely right that I actually go to the boss right after the new year of 14. And I'm like, "You got to send me home." I said, this isn't me. This isn't working for me. And we were just on the cusp of Super Bowl. Super Bowl is being held out in MetLife Stadium. Mm-hmm. And Times Square was all set up for Super Bowl Boulevard. So we had a big imprint, the Detective Bureau, borough down there for investigative. We always put out investigative details for any big event. So there already be detectives on the ground in case something happened. And he says, "Let's get through the Super Bowl and come back and talk to me," which was fine. Listen, I had an audience with him every day. Not that I never saw the guy. And everything was in motion already. And I mean, watching his interview last week when he says how he got the call from John Miller for him to interview, I think his seat is still spinning. He left so fast that night to go interview. And good for him. Yes, without a doubt, they picked the right guy for that job, and never got a chance to go back to the Bronx except when I was visiting with the chief of detectives. So he was awarded the big job in March of 14, and I went down as on paper. It's kind of funny. I was like, I'm your what? And on paper, I was his confidential aide. So I like to consider myself his consigliere, and especially, wartime consigliere. Because I tell you what, we were tasked now with turning the job and making the Detective Bureau and giving it back to the men and women to do that job. Like I said, and the last time I promise you, I'm going to mention his name, Chief Pulaski. Like I says, I didn't always agree with what he did and how he kind of handcuffed the guys and girls. And it was, hey, you guys have a job to do. You have a serious job to do. Let's go do it. You couldn't get into the office. You couldn't walk into the chief of detective's office as a member of the Detective Bureau. You had to present your ID card. I mean, it was ridiculous. We're on the 13th floor of One Police Plaza. There's multiple levels of security before a detective or a sergeant or lieutenant, could come into the chief of detective's office. And, I remember changing that with our secretary. I'm like, no, we're welcoming. We love detectives now. We love our people. Bring them in, and treat them well. And we're going to give them whatever support they needed to do their job the right way, and a very real interesting time for me, 4 years in that office until the boss actually aged out, unfortunately, at his 63rd birthday. A lot of exposure with both Commissioner Bratton now and Commissioner O'Neill. Got to see, the Detective Bureau absorb, and I'll use the word absorb, OCCB. in 2016 under Commissioner Bratton, and talking about opening my eyes to a whole nother world that I was never involved in, and that was OCCB and narcotics. And I mean, my absolute hats off to anybody who did that work in their career. Just gritty, amazing, just hard edged work, and got to see it all, man. It was a great place to see. And like I said, the 4 years, I got to see how the job actually worked from the inside out, and how we could do the right thing. And listen, it wasn't always fun and games. There was times, I had to play, like say, judge and jury. And one of my jobs was, okay, this doesn't get to the boss, or this has to get to the boss. And, one of those theories. But it was a good time, and I got to see how the job actually worked at that level. But I was also happy, I say, like, he retired, I think it was about April 17th or 18th of 2018, excuse me. Like he left at 3:30 and I left at like 3:40. Because listen, that's just how it was. And, I was tied to him, and I welcomed going back out in the working world.
And that leads us to the final 2 years, which is, like I said, why you're under the Tales from the Boom Room banner, which is Arson and Explosion. And it wasn't until I talked to Billy Ryan that I got the understanding of A, the workload that A&E takes on, and also B, how small they are. Now, for those of you that are a little bit newer to the program, maybe you're watching for the first time tonight, long-term viewers, you guys already know this. A&E is not the bomb squad. They're separate from the bomb squad. They do cross paths with each other because the bomb squad doesn't have time to go out and investigate these incidents. A&E can. A&E is a citywide unit, much like the bomb squad is, but A&E is significantly smaller, whereas the bomb squad has probably, they won't tell you the exact number, between 30 and 40 cops. A&E has, like, at their peak, I think Billy Ryan, who retired out of the unit in 2004, was saying like 12, sometimes even smaller. So you're doing work for all 5 boroughs with less than 20 guys and gals. So, but you make it work. You make it work. So tell me about A&E those last years, because I know when the JTTF came to be, A&E's mission in terms of cases they take on versus cases they don't change with it.
So, so there it is, April of 18. And one of the things that, and I know Chief Boyce mentioned when he was on with you last week or 2 weeks ago, was under Bratton, he makes all these task forces to get successful our partners on the federal side, and a lot of it is, listen, we're their key to the city. We're bringing them into the city, and they started a New York City Arson Explosion Task Force, and it was comprised of portions of A&E, not the whole thing. So A&E, like you said, was a lieutenant, 2 sergeants, and 11 to 12 guys. We had 11 to 12 detectives, and so when I first went over there, I went under the umbrella of, we were all task force officers with the ATF. So there was an ATF element and fire marshals, and that's what comprised of the the Arson Explosion Task Force. But the actual Arson Explosion Squad turns out of PSA 4 down at 8th Street and Avenue C. And the other side of it is, actually, when I was there, we turned out a 32 old slip down in the 1st precinct. That's where, basically I would split my time between the two, depending on what was going on. But the Arson Explosion world, I definitely feel, and you just hit on it, where I feel the job, they underutilize the Arson Explosion Squad. They really, truthfully do. There was a point in time where Commissioner Miller actually took the bomb squad out of the Detective Bureau. They were assigned in Forensics Division, which kind of surprised me when I first got to the Chief of Detective's office. I definitely thought that they would be assigned to Special Investigations as well. But they were assigned within the Forensics Investigation Division. And they made the move, and they brought them over to the counterterrorism side, the bomb squad.
Yeah.
Which it makes perfect sense to me. And like I says, and I watched your episode with Paulie Pernicone, and I mean, talent, smart guys, Mark Torrey. I mean, brilliant. Just that is their world. I mean, that is their world. And I tell you what, I met a couple of FBI SABTs and stuff like that. But listen, I'm NYPD 30 years. Nobody does it better than us.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, if I think I was going to give the job maybe a little more time, it's definitely something I might have been interested in. But yeah, I had the interest in the fire side. I was a volunteer fireman for a number of years, and the arson investigations. And not to sound selfish, but the training you undergo in arson explosion, whether you're a boss or a detective. So you receive training down in Redstone Arsenal. It's an Army base in Huntsville, Alabama, via the ATF, and that's where actually hazardous device school is held for the bomb squad. And we go for post-blast investigation training, a total of 3 weeks there. We do homemade explosive classes down there. I personally went for arson classes down there. Minimally, as from the arson side, you got to be a New York State arson investigator. The majority of my office and investigators went through the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and they got the national certs. So the training that's involved and it is really it's special. It's special stuff, and it's high. It's so much different than your actual number detective squad or your homicide squad, because this is a specialty. It is an absolute specialty. And it's real interesting work. Obviously, really interesting work. I remember listening to the past episode with the Macaulay Culkin fire, and the things you got to go out to and what you look for, and multiple. Like I tell you what, 2 instances the arson explosion squad were key in. One is July of 2016. There's an explosion in Central Park, where young gentleman, he's about 18 years old, 18, 20 years old, college students in with a couple of his friends, and they're zip lining off a rock at a 60 and 5. And unfortunately, he lands on a bag that explodes. And July 3rd, 2016, hot as can be, the day before July 4th. And I'm assigned the chief of Ds, and I would always go out. Any major incident, I would go out and make the determination if the boss is going to go on it or not. Since it's not MOS related per se. Anything with a cop, obviously, we're already moving the boss out there. But I got to see a lot of huge scenes, and I pretty much make the determination, hey, he's got to come, or whatever the case is. I remember going out to the park that day, and obviously the day before July 4th, everybody's trying to keep it kind of hush hush. It's fireworks, it's fireworks, it's fireworks. And unfortunately, this young man lost from his knee down. It was catastrophic injury. So you knew there was more to it. Extensive crime scene set up, and actually the explosion is caused by what they determine in the lab, because they get traces of the dirt. They take samples of the dirt when they're processing the scene of TATP, which is triacetone triperoxide, which is highly explosive, seen in multiple terrorist devices throughout the world. And here it is, this bag, which was a bakery bag from Union City, New Jersey, is parked alongside this rock loaded with TATP. And I tell you what, unfortunately, tremendous work, Mike, was put into this case over the past 8 years. And unfortunately, it still remains open. There's a $40,000 reward between Crime Stoppers and the ATF still to this day. And it's really unfortunate, because a really phenomenal detective has the case right now, the senior man in arson explosion. He actually just turned his 34th year on the job, and he's still on. But when I tell you, leads were exhausted from Maine down to New York, out to Illinois. These guys, just kick that case in the butt. But unfortunately, you're dealing with a paper bag, Central Park. You have no idea when the bag was placed there. Who could have brought it? It's a man-made explosive, no less, which is really scary. Is it a science project gone bad and somebody just planted it there? Was it? Let me tell you, obviously we have many theories about how and why it got there. But it's unfortunate, like you say, where some cases just stay with you, and without a doubt, and it's unfortunate because, like I says, the unit and the detective, he takes a little bit of a beating every anniversary, because there's a lot of negative press on the case, and still to this day, Google it, for this past July. But a really interesting case, just to say. And the case folder, the case, the detectives prepared DD5s for their investigative reports, And there's easily got to be like 350 DD5s in this case. And I left 4 years ago, and there was that many. So it's not forgotten. I mean, it's looked at, but it's only so much you could do with it, I guess, and it's unfortunate. But a real interesting, incident, just to say, people don't realize, the arson explosion squad and the bomb squad, things happen daily in the city that you obviously don't want put on, don't make the news, whatever the case is. And between hoax devices the emergency guys going on suspicious devices routinely, every day for them. And they make the determination, hey, you might want to get the bomb squad out here. And that's where I feel, in my 2.5 years in arson explosion, where they're underutilized. I mean, they should be rolling with the bomb squad. I mean, these are your investigators, and I gave them all the prompts before, nothing to take away from the bomb squad. But they're techs. They are techs. They know their stuff, hands down. And like I said, they're the best at what they do. But I feel that strongly about the investigators in arson explosion too. The Chelsea bombing in 2016, in September of 2016, arson explosion ran with that and the 13 squad did phenomenal work as well. I being at the scene, coming in from home this Saturday night, and the destruction. You see these construction. I know you got some of the story about the construction dumpsters that are out there that are mangled and thrown hundreds of feet from this device. And like personal opinion and like talking to various people there, the secondary device that was planted on 29th Street that's actually discovered by 2 state troopers on patrol. Definitely it was planted just opposite a hotel. The name escapes me, but it had a glass facade, and downstairs on the sidewalk was an outdoor restaurant. And that was planted there specifically because the energy of that device, if that exploded, would have broke those windows and shredded the people eating dinner on a Saturday night in Manhattan to shreds, absolute shreds. So obviously, the bad guy, I think Ahmed Rahami, he definitely knew what he was doing, man. And he hit us. He hit us hard. He hit the Marine Corps Marathon in Seaside Heights, 2 days prior. And so arson explosion, they ran with the bomb squad that whole night in our crime scene. And then the feds brought in the crime scene. And it was actually the first, believe it or not, that was the first night. I think Commissioner O'Neill was sworn in the day before. The transfer of the torch went from Bratton to O'Neill like the day before. And this was O'Neill's first day as the police commissioner, his first full day as the police commissioner. And he has a bombing, in his city.
Yeah, it was pretty intense for him because it was that and Karina Vetrano's murder, which I talked about with Chief Boyce, which happened right around the same time. So that was not an easy transition for him, but eventually things were able to even out. And I'm glad you mentioned that because originally, I've mentioned before, if you're going to move, them in counterterrorism makes sense. But if you're going to move the bomb squad anywhere else, you might as well put them in SOD because I think what they're doing is pretty darn special. It doesn't get more special ops than defusing bombs. But like you said, I'm glad you mentioned the role of A&E because they should be, as you said, they should be going out on these cases. And the process starts really from patrol. Patrol sees something suspicious. They call emergency service. Emergency service calls the bomb squad. The bomb squad analyzes it. If it's real, okay, defuse it. If it's not, okay, oof, thank goodness. But again, it's not the bomb squad's incapable of doing this. If they had the time to do investigations, they would.
Of course.
But when you have to cover a whole city of 8 million people for 24 hours a day across multiple tours, you just don't have the time. So that's where A&E comes in, and I get it. In a post 9/11 world, the JTTF is in on a lot, as they should be, not knocking that. But you don't want to forget about the originals either. And A&E, they're one of the longest serving units in policing, not just the NYPD.
Well, and I almost feel like the history of A&E, which goes back to the very late 60s, when you're having the bombings in the city with the Weather Underground and FALN,
yep.
And, where A&E, depending on who you speak to, going back in the day, like we were almost the first prototype of a JTTF, the A&E squad in New York City. They were like handpicked old school detectives out of like the Major Case squad. That was your first rendition of A&E because they realized they didn't have anybody with the expertise to really start looking at these groups and locking them up. And like I said, I think it was like in 72 or something like that was the first MOU between the FBI and the NYPD, and it was arson explosion and the FBI. But going back to reflecting the Chelsea bombing, I mean, 13 Squad and A&E worked that all night long. You know, and obviously I'm there in a different front at the time. My umbrellas, you're tied to the chief at the time, but seeing it and really getting to look at it and seeing what they're doing, and I mean, walking and right along 23rd Street corridor. I mean, the littlest piece of it. That's what you do with a post-blast investigation: is you try and find what you can do to try and put that device back together, or find something, some sort of a serial number, or something that's going to identify that device. Where now, maybe it's a piece of PVC. It was a pipe, okay, and the serial number of that PVC. You can go back to Home Depot with it, run the SKU, see who bought it. I mean, there's so many avenues you could do, but it's scary. It's scary where these things are out there, and they're out there a lot more frequently than what the public knows. But listen, I think once again, like I said, the NYPD, they're the best at what they do. But me personally, if I was anybody with any power, yeah, that bomb squad and A&E would be working hand in hand in a response type of mode. Like, you'll get the guys on the road immediately. And guess what? If it's nothing, turn them around, send them home.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Simple as that.
Check out a 5 and close the case. You took a case, a response case, and that's it. You did what you're there for. Because, like I said, the training they undergo, you got to be attracted to it. And outside of the explosive side, now you're dealing in the fire world with arson investigations, which are complex as can be. This task force, when I was in the task force at the end of my career, so my counterpart in the fire marshals, he's now the chief fire marshal. And my counterpart in the ATF is now the SAC of New York. So I kid. I'm like, well, maybe if I stayed around, I'd be the police commissioner right now. But
what's the old song? 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
That's right. That's right. And I do like meatloaf, so it's good.
Yeah, there you go.
But a talented bunch, and everybody. I tell you what, the fire marshals that were on the task force were part of their special investigation unit. I'd be amiss if I did not, recognize them, because they were phenomenal investigators, really and truthfully. And it was always a learning experience, an absolute learning experience. Yeah, listen, I have my certifications. I was a New York State arson investigator. But until you get in there, and even the base marshals, the fire marshals, you have the Bronx, Manhattan, Queens base. They turn out of Fort Taunton, and then the other group is out in Hooper Street in an old firehouse, and they do Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. And those are the guys who respond to basically every job, and they dig out the scenes. We were coming to any death, anything commercial, anything religious. Those are the type of responses that would generate a response from the task force. And it was kind of odd, because we would kind of then like cherry pick or hand pick. Like, these guys would be working all night at the scene, and then we would get the call, and we would come in, and we wind up like almost, taking the job away from them. Which, listen, it was recognized. It was what it was. But just complex investigations that you got to actually take your time to investigate, because your caseload was smaller than your working detective squads out there. And a lot of forensics you had to wait on. Arson explosion squad, we were the only one. I'm trying to reflect back. You got to excuse me. I think tomorrow I'm actually retired. It's 4 years already. So, we only requested crime scene, which was great. Crime scene. If I was arson explosion supervisor, I could get crime scene out there to any one of my jobs, and they would have to come. Never had evidence collection, not to knock them, but just what we did was just complex, and we needed that little extra. And my guys, and I can't say girls. I didn't have any female investigators. They knew particularly what they wanted and what they would need collected, whether it was a piece of a wall, a piece of a floor, obviously how the burn pattern went. I mean, because you're dealing with some fires. We had multiple fires with multiple deaths. And then we take it forward to 2020, the summer of protests, where we're now dealing with destructive devices with Molotov cocktails, where everybody's trying to blow stuff up, and
police fans mainly.
Well, and I can definitely touch on that case, because we were actively involved in that, and it was kind of poetic justice in one sense. I mean, thankfully, the device didn't light like it should have, and otherwise you'd probably have 8 dead cops in a van. It was in confines of the 8-8 in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And, my guys worked the case, kick the stuffings out of it, Mike. And we were able to identify 2 individuals who were responsible for making the device and lighting it. And they were both lawyers, Brown educated lawyers. And it's just like, it's just poetic justice in one sense, you know what I mean? Where, we did that. I remember getting their text message records, and stuff like that, where they're like, burn it all down. We're going to burn 1 PP. And you're just like, wow. I mean, it's just like angry people. But that was a great culmination because, and with our federal angle, because like I said, we were all deputized with the ATF, and, possession of a destructive device, that's 5 years of Fed time automatically without anybody getting hurt. So it was a great tool in our pocket to have the task force, as a whole, and everybody working together. It was a fun time. It was a good time, and it was different. It says, I go from patrol to graffiti stuff and anti-crime, and now you're dealing with explosives and you're dealing with arson, and
it's quite the jump.
It was quite the jump, man. But something. It's something new again, and here I am. I'm a student of the job again. I go there with 28 years on the job. And I'm a student again, and that's great. It's great. Listen, you got to keep yourself fresh. Got to keep the mind going, man.
Right, you got to keep evolving, and that plays into what I wanted to ask you before we get to the rapid fire, which is like, there's no way to say it. Like 2020 sucked. It was a terrible year, awful year for a lot of reasons. Pandemic, it just wasn't a pleasant time. Were you thinking about leaving anyway, or was it that year that made you say, you know what, I forget this, I'm out here?
So it's probably a year earlier, my wife and I decide to build in Florida, but just to kind of like have something for the future, for down the road. And, we're down on the West Coast in the Bradenton, Sarasota area in a place called Lakewood Ranch. So that was being built. I had a son in the Marine Corps, and I had another son who was a firefighter in Newcastle County, Delaware. And I was approaching my 30 years. And, the house was built. We get through COVID. It's the summer of 20. And doing this sort of work with the protests, and not that it jaded me. Listen, I still went to work. I was still that guy. I was okay with it. Had great people working for me, interested in the work, and I was just kind of like the wife was like, listen, she goes, I love it here. She goes, I'm going to spend a lot of time here. So I was like in New York, kind of by myself, and I just looked at it, sat with it, and I had a cousin. He got on the job a year ahead of me. He got on 89, and he got promoted to sergeant a year ahead of me in 98. And he was a sergeant Midtown South Precinct for his whole time, from 98 right to when he retires in 2020. And he ran the South. He was the guy up in the office. He ran the South for multiple COs, and he was just the guy. And we kind of kidded each other at one point where, when I was, Chief Boyce's guy, he goes, you're running the bureau and I'm running Manhattan South. Well, it was kind of funny, two kids who used to sit on a stoop on Hughes Avenue in the Bronx, his grandmother's house, and read the lyrics to Billy Joel's Glass Houses. Here we are, and running like big shops, for the NYPD. And he calls out of the blue, and he goes, hey, just want to let you know I dropped my papers. And I'm like floored by it. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah. You remember when we talked 2 weeks ago, and you literally said, we did our time. It's time to like turn it over to somebody else. I says, I do. And he goes, yep, you convinced me. I dropped my papers today. So that's all my wife had to hear. I didn't have a leg to stand on at that point. So I had an opportunity. I said, listen, that was probably about August. I said, let me get to my 30th anniversary. That meant something to me, which was October 15th of 2020. Went back and called it a career. And I tell you what, a humbling end. I mean, I'm honored where I'm walked out by my peers out of 32 Old Slip. It was a tremendous day, and my family got to share in that. It's a day I'll never forget. I have the videos of it. Bagpipers. The only reason why I didn't have a helicopter for me is because it was raining. The old police car, but it was a testament, I guess, to my career, because I had my first partners in District 3 came back for me. One being Assistant Chief Carlos Valdez, who you might know as the CEO of, Carlos and I were partners back in District 3.
I had no idea he was an original transit guy.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't want to share that. He's a big E-man, so I don't know.
Yeah, big E-man now.
Big E-man. So yeah, so Carlos came back, and another friend who I was friends since I'm 5 years old, and we got on the job in transit together, and I had dinner with him Saturday night. He came back, and just chiefs and people, and my homicide team from 2005 who could find Bigfoot, they show up, and it was really, really, I mean, humbling with it. They piped me out of the job, and it was great, man. It was great. You look back, and just a wonderful time. Just doing it. And getting to meet so many great people. And I hope I left my mark with them. I really do. I think I took care of a lot of people, which I'm happy to do. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to pat on the back for that. But we said earlier in the podcast, Mike, good work shouldn't go unrecognized, and that's a big thing. I want to say, if you're a boss, if you're a leader, you got to recognize your people, man. You got to treat them the right way, and look out for them. And I want to say, and I hope that's probably one things I'd like to leave behind is, and I hope I had that effect on some people.
Chief Lukash, also another big man, says hi. Says say hello to your brother for me.
I will. I absolutely will. So,
but man, Chief Lukash.
Yeah, I mean, but like just to go back, the arson explosion side of it. Yeah, I just wish the job would recognize them, because it's a shame. I mean, I talked to the guys still on the regular, and probably no different. Listen, they're a special unit in the Detective Bureau. They're in uniform multiple times a week. There's times now they close the office down, Mike, because they're putting these guys out on all out in Brownsville or wherever in the Bronx. And I'm like, they're like a major case. Literally, think about it. That arson with 5 people dead, or that explosive incident. That's who investigates it. And these guys are in uniform. These places, just because. I just don't understand. Listen, the job has changed in the 4 years that I'm out, and it is what it is. But you got to have a little bit of a safety net too. I guess we're lucky that they're not investigating these cases more often. But I definitely feel like the job, underutilizes them as a whole, because, like emergency services, 6 months of STS school, bomb squad, 6 to 8 weeks of hazardous device school, but it's a little known fact, the schooling and the training that arson explosion goes through. We all went out to hazmat tech training out at Floyd Bennett Field. Arson explosion, you're hazmat techs. I'm floating in Jamaica Bay in a Class A, entry suit, and that's the training part of the training that we push upon the guys in arson explosion. And it, like I said, it's a shame, because I know the good work that could be done by them, and just how the job, kind of looks at them right now and what they're doing with them. But who am I? What do I know? I'm just a retired guy these days. So.
No, I agree. That's one of the keys to this miniseries, is to shed a light, not just on the bomb squad. The bomb squad's work is world renowned, but also A&E as well. So it's both arson, explosion, and the bomb squad. And Billy Ryan is in the chat is a big part of that in the unit, of course, from 1993 until 2004. Brings us to the rapid fire. Time's flown by. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Some of these questions you've kind of already touched on. So depending on the way the rapid fire goes, we'll probably just skip over them. But the first one I think I can ask you, which is a lot of tough cases, like that 2-year-old and like the kid that was killed over the cell phone, but a lot of uplifting cases too. What would you say in your time in the Detective Bureau, almost 20 years, was the most uplifting case you worked on, or at least one that had a really uplifting result?
Wow. It was a sergeant in the 4-8 squad, and 12-year-old girl actually delivers a baby in her bedroom. And unbeknownst to her parents, hardworking Dominican folks, didn't know she was pregnant. Calls the boyfriend, and the boyfriend basically disposes of the baby, pushing him through a window grate. Which you said uplifting, and I'm the complete opposite right now. But once again, the work that went into it with my squad, with the medical examiner's office, with the parents, okay, and that's what I'm touching on as a parent at that time,
right?
And listen, the girl, the girl was definitely afraid. She didn't know what to do, what she could do, what her options were. That sticks with me. And in the end, although you had a newborn who didn't see the light of day, unfortunately, in the end, it worked out great with the district attorney's office, with the parents, with getting this girl the help that she deserved and needed. That sticks with me. Yeah, I'll go with that one. I'll leave it at that.
That's fine. At least I had an uplifting result. Yeah. Second one, I could ask you the second one. The third one, I know for a fact you've touched on, so we'll gloss over that one. Second of the question in rapid fire: how did your approach to crime change when you moved from anti-crime into the role of a detective supervisor?
So there you go, where go anti-crime, right? Let's go get the bad guy. Let's go put our hands on people. Let's sit back. Let's watch. Let's do this. And now you go up to the squad and so like talk about, my first week or two upstairs in the 4-H squad, like you hear the RMPs like leaving the parking lot with lights and sirens, and I felt like like a little kid. I'm glued to the window, like what's going on? What's going on? Because you learn really quickly the detective squad is reactive. You were not proactive. When they want us out there, they're going to call for us, and when they call for us, we're going to go out there and we're going to do the job. And it took me not a while, but you learn exactly what goes on. Every piece of paper generated by that patrol cop, every radio run, every 61 that's generated, guess where it goes? To the detective squad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And these detectives, I give them, I tell you what, like I said, 17 years of my career in the detective bureau. And the detective squad, detectives they work for a living. They really do. That's why I really took exception, go back to Pulaski, where he tried to make the work robotic. And you just can't. You just can't. And
you can't replace human feel ever.
No,
doesn't matter what profession, you cannot replace the human touch.
So
you need it. Yeah. No, thank you for that. I guess I could ask you a third one. What the heck? Can you share a moment from your time as confidential aide that left a lasting impression on you?
Just to the fact that I wish I got to work with Chief Boyce earlier in my career, because I probably, like I said, without a doubt, he the accolades were there from his part and what I did for the guy. But like I said, it was uplifting. You mentioned uplifting. It was uplifting bringing the detective bureau back to where it should be in the job, on that pedestal and what they did for a living. And I was very happy to be a part of that.
Yeah, it makes sense, of course. And again, he was a great guy to work for. Fourth question, the rapid fire. I'm going to tweak it a little bit because this one you definitely already answered. If time machines existed and you could go back to any portion or any timeline in your career of those 30 years, what's the sweet spot you're going back to?
Anti-crime Boston 4-8.
Okay. Yeah, good spot. That was a heck of a run there too. So don't blame me for that answer at all. And the fifth one. Which assignment in your career do you feel most defined your time in the NYPD?
Wow, great question. I like to say when I was a squad commander at a 4-5. And although not the busiest shop, but a very political shop. And I like the fact that, I was everything. As a squad commander, you are, you're the commanding officer, you're the integrity control, you're everything. And, I like to say, you're the Indian chief, you're the priest, you're the squad boss, and those are your people. And it's your job to support them and run their investigations. And like you said, that's where I really feel, Steve Mancini was noticed. I got the money as a squad CO. And I ran with it. It was a good time in my career. It was a fun time in my career. And I thank the people of the 4-5 squad for supporting me. So
thank you. This was a heck of an episode. I'm so glad I got you on. So glad we were able to link up, of course, through LinkedIn, ironically enough. So before I say goodbye to the audience and I go off to watch the New York Yankees disappoint me again in Game 3 of the World Series.
Think positive, Mike. Come on.
We need our captain to start hitting, that's for sure. And hopefully Clark Schmidt can give us a good start tonight and the bats can wake up. Before we say goodbye to the audience and stick around, we'll talk off air. Any shout outs to anyone or anything you want to give?
My family. Listen, like I says, for 30 years, I got to do, had the opportunity to work for the city of New York. And one thing my wife never stood in my way. She's always like supported my career. Hey, I think I got to go, or that phone call. Not going to be home tonight. See you tomorrow. And my boys, growing up and listen, I wasn't home a lot, but I always tried to be home and make these things. But I have responsibilities, and they recognize that. And I like to say that's why I'm retired now, and we get to spend as much time as possible together and do a lot of great stuff. So definitely my family.
A great shout out, and of course, a shout out as always to everyone who tuned in tonight, whether you were watching through YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. I appreciate all of you. And for those of you that are going to be listening on the audio side later on, appreciation to you guys as well. And as always, the producer Vick in the background doing a great job as he always does. Coming up next in the Mike Dinovative podcast, I have a scheduling conflict this Friday, so I'm not going to be doing a show this Friday as we usually do. We're back next Monday. He was a chief in Carolina, wrote a book on fire tactics. That's going to be Dan Jones. who'll be on for the Best of the Bravest Nationwide edition. We're going to try to book more shows as we go. It's kind of, for those of you in the audience, we're playing it by ear because, as those of you know, in 2025, in the early stages, I'm off to Fire Academy to go through the training to become a firefighter. So I want to make sure that we don't book too far in advance because we'll take a hiatus during that 3-month period where I'm in the academy. But we'll keep you guys posted as we book guests and hopefully give you more great shows in the meantime before we take that break. So bear with us. We're trying to bring you as much content as we can, and we appreciate you guys in the audience as always. For those of you listening on the audio side, from their legendary 1994 album, tonight's outro song comes off the album Troublegum, of which turns 30 this year, and that is Therapy with Screamager. In the meantime, on behalf of retired NYPD Sergeant Steve Mancini, producer Victor, and all of you who tuned in tonight, I am Mike Colón. This has been Volume 38 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. We will see you next time. Have a great night. Let's go Yankees, and that's all we got.